All right. As I intimated last night, this Sabbath we're going to be doing something a little bit different. Reason being is some that read the daily updates on my main page of the site are wondering why the powers that be keep bringing up climate change in the news, and why I believe it's going to lead to the New World Order, and which then, of course, leads to the mark. If you've been following the articles I posted recently, you may already understand this still. Some may need to see how this all got started to get a better idea as to why they're going to be doing what they're going to be doing, or why they already started. But the main reason I do this is to glorify the Lord that declared the prophecy of the 10 toes of Daniel in chapter 2, wherein the prophet deciphers the dream of King Nebuchadnezzar regarding all the kingdoms from his day to our day. I have some links to videos and studies in box number 1 of the sermon notes if you're new to this prophesied truth and you need to better understand it. So when we look at all the facts compiled by the 31,487 scientists that are adamantly rejecting global warming as bad science, we find that Al Gore and his small handful of weathermen masquerading as scientists are easily found to be lying. As I stated so many times before, and one time in a sermon I did this back in 2009, as well as a sermon series I did about 6 months ago, lying, be it from the pulpit or the lectern or the college desk, was prophesied long ago as their way of explaining away the soon-to-arrive plagues to the people that they have under their confusion and under their control. They need to concentrate on what they call climate change so that when the real plagues of Revelation finally hit, the indoctrinated masses of the world will be primed and ready to believe it's nothing more than climate change. And then they will do anything Rome suggests to protect their lives. And yes, even before then, with the buy and sell situation, you're going to see them, because the calamities are going to increase. It's going to, it's going to get pretty intense before the plagues hit, of course, but after the plagues, it's literally going to be off the charts. So, and yes, as prophesied, they will do so even if it means killing their neighbors when it comes to what Rome suggests that they do. The people are going to follow them because, and they're even going to kill their own loved ones that they believe are causing the plagues of Revelation or the calamities that they think is nothing but climate change. You remember what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 10, verses 34 to 6? He said, "Think not that I come to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword. For I am come to set a man at variance against his father, and the daughter against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's foes shall be they of his own household." And no, this does not mean Jesus is an angry God. Just as he took the blame for hardening Pharaoh's heart long ago, he takes the blame today. What I mean is, Jesus doesn't purposely set out to make people hate each other. The truth he teaches angers them, because they love the lies that they have been so comfortable living in all their lives. We are that close, brothers and sisters. This climate change agenda means they are right now setting things up to hide the truth about the soon-to-arrive plagues of Revelation. Still, some may not see what we see here, so I need to explain it a bit further on how all this works. Now, first off, I would like to point out that Al Gore, the main advocate in climate change, is in fact a man that will lie to better position himself with the Vatican, who hired him during John Paul II's pontificate to push this climate change agenda way back in the 1980s. As many of you may recall, almost immediately after starting his campaign for Rome, many of his cohorts' emails were hacked that relayed the truth to all the world that global warming was in fact a farce that was cooked up by the New World Order globalists who are hell-bent on profit and control. In 2009, Al Gore said this regarding the hacked emails that embarrassed all his dishonest scientists. He said, and I actually have a link to this in one of the boxes down there. You can actually get this on video, too, on YouTube. He said about the hackers that they took a few phrases out of context. These are private emails more than 10 years old. The most recent one is from 10 years ago. Well, the problem with that statement is people did, in fact, read those emails and found that the most recent email found in that hacked stack was sent on November 12th, 2009. That was just 28 days from when Gore stated they were all over 10 years old. So yes, we have him on this hands down. There are also many other lies he stated over the years that have been documented all over the Internet. Everything from claiming to be the creator of the Internet on March 9th, 1999 in a campaign interview with Wolf Blitzer, to claiming his father, a senator, was a champion of civil rights in the 1960s, when in reality he was a well-known racist who openly voted against the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Now, I don't want to do a huge sermon about all the facts and figures that prove global warming to be a lie. I would rather want to use this time to point out why they needed this scheme to be accepted by the leaders of the world that were going to be gathered at Copenhagen back in 2009. And how will this affect each and every person on earth as prophesied regarding the methods of control needed by Rome to enforce the mark of the beast? I mean, out of the many ways those 31,487 scientists prove global warming is a lie, the best one that I can see has to be what Al Gore said, which was recorded by the Times Online as well as Associated Press on December 15th. First, the AP article. He said, some of the models suggest that there is a 75% chance that the entire North Polar ice cap during some of the summer months will be completely ice-free within the next 5 to 7 years. The problem here is the scientist Gore quoted was Dr. Maslowski. After posting Gore's comments in the Times Online, Dr. Maslowski had this to say about Gore's statement. He said it's unclear to me how this figure was arrived at. I would never try to estimate likelihood at anything as exact as this. Still, at present, and I just checked this the other day, there's 1,310,000 websites still carrying Al Gore's bogus statements regarding an ice-free world. Back in 2009, when it was proven to be misspoke, there were well over 2 million websites promoting his lie. What amazes me is there's still over 1 million 6 years later. This assumption of Gore and his so-called scientists is all besides the fact that the real scientists that study Arctic ice for a living at the Nansen Environmental and Remote Sensing Center in Bergen, Norway, stated that the ice is not only increasing in size, it's doing so at an amazing rate. And there's a reason I'm sharing all this. You'll see why in a minute. Back in 2009, when Gore was pushing this for Rome, the polar regions actually got colder, and there was 1 million square kilometers more ice than there was in 2007. So I ask, why all the lies and all the hype? Well, it has to do with getting the global leaders that are going to be gathering at Copenhagen, getting them in their hip pocket, and it has to do with something they started way back in 1961. It's all about the long prophesied global government. Now, I know it sounds like a huge leap from global warming to global governing, but this is how the powers that be work best. As the prophet Daniel prophesied long ago, Rome always uses craftiness in their methods to hide the truth behind their actions. The prophet said in Daniel 8:25 that it is through his policy that he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. Not only is climate change one crafty way to get all the people on earth into one arena of thought, it is also a surefire means to get all of them in agreement without firing a single shot. But as the prophet also declares, it's not wise to stand up against the Prince of Princes, because he shall be broken without hand. And yes, it is Rome who's behind all this. We all know by watching, the influx of greedy politicians clamoring for a seat in Copenhagen, that it's all about politics. I mean, that's a no-brainer. And we do have proof that John Paul II hired Al Gore in the 80s, which actually started this whole prophesied scheme. Well, politically speaking, they were already in the works in the 60s. And the present Jesuit Pope has accelerated the climate change agenda to such an extent that even the loyal Roman Catholic politicians like Rick Santorum had to publicly ask him to clam up on this and concentrate more on his church. I just posted an article about that on June 4th. Still, if you study Christian prophecy and saw how historical political leaders designed their methods of control, one can see that the political structure of today is all based on Rome's ancient administrative design. That being said, how do they take the leap from global warming to global governing? Now, keep in mind, this is by no means an in-depth representation or an exhaustive study. To share all I have would make for one huge sermon. And like all of you, I'm watching this unfold day by day in the news as well, so please bear with me on this. But for those of you that want a crash course on all this, see my climate change will lead to the mark page on the website when you get a chance. It's in the Antichrist section on the bottom. And as much as is out there, much, much more is hidden. And this is why the powers that be like to keep their plans behind locked doors as long as possible. The less time we have to check into their work, the better it is for them to stealthily garner that control over us. So I'm just going to be highlighting the obvious factors I was able to understand over the years. I have 7 points to share on this, and I found doing this research that it's pretty intense how sneaky they're doing all this stuff behind the closed doors for the most part. And I don't recall all the websites I got all the information from, but I do have links to many of the important points throughout. So anyway, point number 1. In 2009, there were 190 out of 192 nations gathering for what is now being referred to as the secretive Copenhagen Treaty. That's a global treaty, by the way. He's going to destroy many with peace. Daniel wasn't kidding. And it's a secret to us, of course, but the leaders knew of this treaty long before going to Copenhagen. Its official title was Framework Convention on Climate Change. As the last few decades have proven in the political arena, only Rome could get that many countries to agree on any one thing. And they didn't really agree yet. They were just all agreeing to go to that, to the meeting. John Paul II was instrumental in getting most of the nations into Rome's hip pocket during his 26-year pontificate. This is why he was elected so young, as was John Paul I. He was elected as a young pope, too. That's not a coincidence. They're not usually elected that young. He had a long job to do, and when John Paul I made it obvious he wasn't going to do it, they killed him, and then John Paul II stepped up. And those refusing to bow to him were threatened with annihilation by the prophesied military of the Roman police force in the United States of America. They've been using our force for a while. The treaty deadline was on the table until the end of January 2010. It was signed out of the 192 nations, 141 of them signed it. So in so doing, they have generated a valid foundation for a global agreement among all the nations because Rome wields her power by using the old pretentious method of majority rule. That means even if those 51 nations refuse to sign on, they're still going to have to obey what the other 141 leaders are going to legislate in the upcoming New World Order. So, point number 2. On October 21st, 2009, Lord Christopher Walter Monckton declared at a conference in St. Paul, Minnesota, that this treaty states a world government is going to be created. See the link? It was a meeting about climate change. But here he's saying it's a world government is going to be created. And then he goes on to say that the world government actually appears as the first of the 3 main purposes of the new entity. The second purpose is the transfer of wealth from the countries of the West to the third world countries. I have his entire 1 hour and 35-minute speech linked out in the sermon notes. So now do you see why the present Jesuit Pope is also pushing redistribution of wealth along with climate change? And yes, in so doing, he is actually commanding those 141 nations that a socialist form of global government has to be formed, just like John Paul II and Benedict suggested, but didn't really have any signatures. The Pope is right now working on an encyclical that will address all this. And he plans to share this September, I think, around September 23rd, first to the United Nations, of course, but then he's going to bring it to the U.S. Congress in September of this year. That actual encyclical is going to be published this coming Thursday in 5 different languages. So it's already on the table. It's already out there. In an article titled Vatican Aligns with the United Nations on World Governance in April of this year, and for those of you listening to the recording, that's 2015, it stated that the Vatican's attempt to join forces with the United Nations on the issues of global warming and climate change as additional evidence the Vatican is following a blueprint for structuring the world's political and economic authorities into a centralized world government. In that speech I mentioned earlier about Monckton back in 2009, he does go on to explain how all nations, including the United States, will have to forfeit their sovereignty by signing on to this treaty. This is, of course, something Rome will demand, and prophecy does declare, will receive. And for those of you that want information on that, see my 10 Toes of Daniel Are Lining Up videos posted in box number 1 of the sermon notes. Point number 3. The economic disaster of 2008 and 9 here in America was suggested way back in 1961 as a possible catalyst that could be used to ignite the political need for a global government. This is why the talking got a little bit more graphic in the media about global government. Back in 1961, when this idea was drafted by the powers that be, eminent domain laws, global warming, homeland security, transfer of wealth, and a few other tidbits that are all but a few in place today, right now, already signed, sealed, and delivered as legislated bills and law now. They are exactly what was suggested by the Vatican's secret globalists that John F. Kennedy tried to expose in the early 1960s. Some of you may recall Kennedy's secret society speech that he did on April 27th of 1961. I mean, could it be he was assassinated for that reason? Yes, some are convinced it is, and others believe it was the Bay of Pigs fiasco. But some that believe the speech was more so, and the Bay of Pigs fiasco was more like a smokescreen to hide the fact that he was killed for what he said about the secret society. So it's just a mess. We'll all find out when it's shouted from the rooftops anyway, so it doesn't really matter. So point number 4. Belgian Prime Minister Herman Van Rompuy stated as soon as he was elected as the European Union's first president that the Climate Change Conference in Copenhagen is another step toward the global management of our planet. Number 5. In a Christmas speech of 2005, Pope Benedict XVI first spoke on these now favored global warming scare tactics of pandemics and economic situations and terrorism as good reasons to let the child of Bethlehem take you by the hand into a much-needed global government that will fix all these problems. However, his graphic lack of popularity, his molestation scandals, and his inspired exodus of millions from the Catholic Church is why he actually resigned. Since Jesuit Pope Francis took office, however, those numbers have climbed back up and went a little further. And it's no mistake that a lot of these popes like to claim Jesus is either dead on a cross or a child of Bethlehem. That makes them look much more superior over him. Point number 6. In that 181-page secret Copenhagen Treaty that I linked out in box number 8, by the way, of the sermon notes, it says in Annex 1, paragraph 38, that the scheme for the new institutional arrangement under the convention will be based on 3 basic pillars: government, facilitative mechanism, and financial mechanism. And the basic organization of which will include, and it's kind of in-depth, and so just to summarize all this, the following has to do with subsections A, B, and C, which do in fact touch on such items as government ruling guidelines, financial guidelines, the buy and sell thing. They got to have that in there, so it's in there. And then, of course, the compensation guidelines or technological guidelines, work programs for mitigation of same, and international monitoring guidelines and wealth transfer guidelines, as well as other aspects of global government that they have to have if they're ever going to be able to enforce the mark of the beast. And then finally, number 7. All of that I shared to this point are well-documented fruits of ancient mass control methods first used by the Roman Empire in their infancy, where the prophet Daniel first mentioned them coming on the scene in Daniel chapter 11, verse 14. Click the link in box number 13 of the sermon notes below for a breakdown on that prophetic statement. That was brought forth, the Lord blessed me with that study so as to combat the so-called King of the North theology being Turkey. But there's a lot of bonuses to that study. I mean, I, of course, proved, just using the Bible and historic record, that the King of the North is the papacy. We know they're using Islam today to do what they're doing, to killing the Christians. And so a lot of people are saying, no, the King of the North is, well, not a lot of people are saying it, but they're doing that to try to get people off the track of truth. So, as we can see, Rome never changes. Prophecy does say this evil empire will rise again to enforce its mark upon those, the prophet Amos said that in our day refuse to trust their Christian Bibles, or even read them for that matter. And it warns about all this stuff in the last days, and they don't read it. And the amazing thing is all one needs to do is now look around, and you can see literally billions of people walking about in the days of confusion, primed and ready to receive the mark. This so-called global warming agenda has nothing to do with global warming as much as it does with the global government prophesied to be Rome's Luciferian prize for our day. This is what I've been saying since day one, because it's just that obvious. Think about it. Their reasoning behind all this is an echo of Ronald Reagan's UFO speech with a bit of a twist. He stated the following back in 1987. I have it linked out below. There's an actual video I posted on the site with Ronald Reagan actually saying this. He said, and I believe he said this to the United Nations. He said, perhaps, yeah, he did. September 21st, 1987. He was addressing the United Nations. He said, perhaps we need some outside universal threat. I occasionally think how quickly our differences would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. Global warming will work for them in the same way in that they can make the claim that we are all on the same planet and we must work together to prevent the destruction of the world we all live in. Just as an alien life form can be considered a global threat wherein all must forget their differences to work together, climate change can and is presently being painted in the same way. This is also why Rhode Island Senator Sheldon Whitehouse just suggested last Monday that the U.S. government considered using the RICO Act against anyone suggesting their so-called scientific facts are bogus. That's right. They want to place people in jail for declaring global warming is a lie because all our lives are threatened by what they call climate change. Forget about free speech laws. Those are off the table. Therefore, anyone denying their so-called science would be a threat to all on Earth now because we're on the same planet. So off to jail with them, and then later, off with their heads. Yes, Christians will be beheaded for refusing the mark of Rome, but they will claim the increased calamities are our fault for refusing to bow to the Pope's mandate on Sunday laws, which by that time they will have been able to convince the world Sunday laws is something that will stop the calamities, when in fact actually make them to accelerate into the 7 last plagues. But then that is their judgment, not ours. So as I stated in the article I posted on Monday about the RICO Act, it was legislated to actually stop the tobacco companies from using lies to hide the scientific facts about their deadly product that has killed tens of millions of people. Cigarettes, right? But the scientists that are proving the climate change agenda to be a farce, tens of thousands of them, they are actually using good science that can be verified. They're doing, and these guys that are pushing global warming, it's just a handful of scientists that are in the hip pocket of the Vatican and friends of Al Gore. So these scientists that are preaching the truth, they are doing the exact opposite of what the tobacco industry was doing. In other words, the RICO Act doesn't apply here. These reputable scientists are actually using scientific facts to expose their lies, not the other way around. But as Daniel predicted, they're going to use lies as God uses truth. And so anyone basing their statements on truth must be promoted as a liar who is endangering all of us on the planet because it's a global problem, just like Ronald Reagan intimated in his UFO speech. Seeing how the media is controlled by 5 major U.S. corporations in bed with Rome now, who are also being regulated by American politicians with powers similar to that of Herod in his day, these corrupt leaders will use climate change to enforce the mark of the beast. Yes, it's easy to see who will win this battle, but we can praise the Lord, our King and Savior, actually wins the war. So, what will happen once Rome gets its prophesied New World Order? Well, what happened directly after Rome's Lisbon Treaty was ratified on December 1st, 2009? Once that brand new European Union Constitution was drafted across the land, Rome had their power secured upon all those nations within that union. In less than 24 hours, I think it was like 14 or 15 hours, they declared Sunday shopping unconstitutional in Germany. And no wonder, as Benedict was a German who did in fact serve as a Nazi roof gunner during the war. Therefore, as soon as Rome gets this same power globally, we will see Sunday laws being passed all around the world just as prophecy predicted. But as we also know, they have to have some catalyst to declare Sunday laws, even though they know the reason they're passing them is to shut us up. That's why I'm saying we are that close. The loud cry is going forth, and it's going to get very loud very soon, very quickly, and it's going to start emptying their churches. And so they're putting all their ducks in a row because they know what's coming, because their dying God is guiding them. And so they're just setting the stage for what prophecy said is going to happen. So they're going to have the tools necessary to try to shut us up, and the only way they can shut us up is to declare the calamities are there because people refuse to go to church on Sunday. And they already did that back in the Christmas tsunami with that Presbyterian minister who went forth and actually said that. People weren't going to church on Sundays, and that's why that tsunami hit. So they've already tested the waters, and it already worked for them. But now they got it global. It's not just in one little region now, where 300,000 people died in that tsunami. Now they got this whole thing to where they can go global. The Copenhagen Treaty, 141 nations signed it. It's merely a giant step forward in that prophesied direction. So what's so sad about all this? And it's really, really sad when you think about this. Satan used Al Gore's greed for riches and power as a way to get the bulk of this agenda pushed forward. The immense wealth he has piled up to enhance his status among his investors, business partners, and political pawns is the ultimate carrot if I've ever seen one. This man, Al Gore, is literally heaping treasures together for the last days, just as James chapter 5, verse 3 predicted the wicked are going to do. Untold riches have been placed on this man's table that he could not hope to spend in many lifetimes, and all he has to do is follow orders from Satan's bride in Rome, while using his political connections in D.C. to assure the man of sins prophesied success in that arena. Al Gore may very well go down in history as the pivotal pawn used by Satan to ensure the planet sees the mark of the beast enforced upon billions of lukewarm souls. What a horrific legacy, to say the least. Gore may very well become the modern-day Judas that offers millions of Christians up as martyrs unto Rome. How fitting for this man to have been given the surname Gore. And one last thing. I can't help but find this global warming fiasco to be a bit ironic in its framework. They use the lie that the planet is heating up so as to make trillions in profits, while at the same time force the masses into modern-day economic slavery using a socialistic format. Religiously speaking, as their fruits clearly proclaim, the leaders are in agreement with Rome, who is in fact the largest known group of pagan prelates on the planet. And as is understandable by rituals and dogmas of the pagan religion, they do truly worship the sun. Now, for the irony in all this. Since they worship the sun instead of the creator of the sun, prophecy tells us that the Lord will soon give them what they crave in plague number 4. It says in Revelation 16, verse 8, that the fourth angel poured out his vial upon the sun, and power was given unto him to scorch men with fire. If you think the drought in California is bad now, wait until that plague hits. The sun scorches these wicked men and their followers with intense heat, as well as dries up the waters and kills off quite a bit of the crops. But as for the Christians they hope to persecute, Psalm 91:10 says, there shall no evil befall thee, neither shall any plague come nigh thy dwelling. So don't worry about this, brothers and sisters. This is their judgment, not ours. So when all is said and done, the popes and Al Gore will finally be 100% correct. There will be an intense season of global warming on the planet, but nothing like these men could have ever imagined. At the end of the 1,000 years, when hellfire consumes them, global warming of today will appear as an Arctic blast in comparison. I hope and pray that you were blessed by what was shared this Sabbath day.